They told me to be independent like it was life advice, when it was really an eviction notice. 9 years later, I walked into my little sister's wedding thinking I could stay invisible, until my mother spotted me and made the whole hallway turn to ice. Then the groom went ghost white, because he didn't just recognize me. He recognized what my family had been hiding before that night was over. Their perfect story didn't just crack, it collapsed. My name is Harper James, and for the last 9 years, I have been practicing the art of becoming invisible. I did not come to Charleston to start a war. I did not come to burn down a legacy or to shatter the delicate crystal facade of a family that had surgically removed me from their history nearly a decade ago. I came simply because my partner, Sloan, asked me to. She needed a +1, a quiet shadow to stand beside her while she navigated a room full of donors and hospital executives. And I told myself that I could do that. I told myself that I was a different person now, forged in the fires of compliance audits and regulatory frameworks, a woman who dealt in hard facts and undeniable evidence. I told myself that I could walk into this luxury wedding weekend, sip a glass of champagne, and remain completely and utterly forgettable. The venue was the kind of aggressive perfection that makes your teeth ache. It was a sprawling historic estate on the water, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and the heavy, humid weight of old money. Everywhere I looked, there were chandeliers strung from ancient oak trees, catching the light of the setting sun. The tables were set with linens that probably cost more than my first car, and the guests moved with that specific, coordinated grace of people who have never had to worry about an overdraft fee in their lives. It was flawless. It was breathtaking. It was exactly the kind of perfect that my family worshipped. To them, appearance was not just a priority. It was a religion. If a thing looked perfect, it was perfect. If a family looked happy in a Christmas card photo. Then the screaming matches behind closed doors did not exist. I stood near a pillar wrapped in white roses, watching the crowd, and I felt a cold, familiar stones settle in the pit of my stomach. I adjusted the strap of my dress. It was a deep navy silk, elegant but understated, chosen specifically to deflect attention. I had spent 2 hours in front of the mirror that morning, analyzing every angle, ensuring that I looked successful enough to belong but boring enough to be ignored. That was the goal. Blend in, be the furniture, be the wallpaper. I watched Sloan across the room. She was brilliant, effortlessly commanding the attention of 3 men in tuxedos who were hanging on her every word about healthcare compliance and donor structuring. She looked over at me and offered a quick, reassuring smile. I raised my glass slightly in return, signaling that I was fine, I was safe. But safety is a relative concept when you are standing in a room full of ghosts. As the reception hall began to fill, I started to spot them. At first, it was just a feeling, a prickle on the back of my neck. Then, I saw the faces. There was Mrs. Gabler, who used to teach Sunday school and tell me that obedience was a virtue while ignoring the bruises on her own daughter's arm. There was Mr. Vance, a business associate of my father, who had once looked right through me in a grocery store after I'd been kicked out. As if poverty was a contagious disease he did not want to catch. These were people who used to look through me like I was a smudge on a window pane. They were the supporting cast of my childhood, the silent witnesses who had watched my parents systematically dismantle my self-worth and had done absolutely nothing to stop it. Seeing them here, laughing and drinking expensive wine, made my skin crawl. It was not fear, exactly. It was a deep, resonant revulsion. I needed air. The orchestrated joy of the ballroom was starting to feel suffocating. The laughter sounded sharp, like breaking glass. I signaled to Sloan that I was stepping out, and she nodded. Turning back to her conversation, I slipped away, moving toward the side exit that led to the main hallway of the estate house. The hallway was quiet, lined with oil portraits of ancestors who looked down with judgmental stares. The floor was black and white marble, polished to a mirror shine so that when you walked, you could see your own reflection moving beneath you like a phantom. I took a deep breath. Leaning against the cool plaster of the wall, I closed my eyes for a second, grounding myself. I reminded myself of the facts. I was 26 years old. I had a career. I had a savings account with 6 months of expenses tucked away. I paid my own rent. I was not the terrified 17-year-old girl who had been told she was worthless. I was Harper James, and I was real. Then I heard it. It was a voice that I had not heard in real life for 3,285 days. It was older now, perhaps a little raspier from age and gin, but it still carried that unmistakable, cutting cadence. It was a voice that did not ask for attention. It demanded it. It was a voice that sounded like it owned the very oxygen in the room. I specifically told the florist that the lilies needed to be open, not budding. What am I paying for if I have to do the job myself? My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. I should have moved. I should have walked toward the restrooms, or outside, or literally anywhere else on the planet. But my feet were lead. I turned my head, slowly, inevitably, toward the sound. My mother was standing at the end of the hallway. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a floor-length gown of silver and gray, the fabric shimmering like liquid mercury. Her hair was swept up in a chignon that defied gravity, not a single strand out of place. She was directing a member of the catering staff with a sharp, pointed finger, her face set in a mask of supreme dissatisfaction. She looked exactly the same, and yet, she looked like a stranger. This was the woman who had given birth to me, and the woman who had told me that my existence was an inconvenience she was tired of managing. For a moment, she did not see me. I was just another figure in the hallway, another guest to be managed or ignored. But then, as if sensing the weight of my gaze, she turned. Her eyes swept over me. I saw the moment of recognition hit her. It was not warm. It was not maternal. It was a physical jolt, like she had stepped on a piece of glass. Her eyes widened, then narrowed instantly into slits of pure, unadulterated hostility. She did not gasp. She did not step back. She stepped forward. The catering staff member faded into the background as my mother marched down the hallway toward me. Her heels clicked against the marble, a rhythmic countdown to impact. The chatter from the ballroom seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her approach and the roaring of blood in my ears. She stopped 5 feet away from me. She looked me up and down, inspecting my dress, my hair, my shoes, looking for a flaw she could exploit. Then she spoke. She did not say hello. She did not use my name. She sneered, loud enough for her voice to carry down the corridor and into the edge of the ballroom. Why is the missing piece here? It was a question, but it felt like a slap. The missing piece. Not her daughter, not a person, just a gap in her perfect picture that she had successfully photoshopped out years ago. Heads turned. I saw guests near the doorway pause, their drinks halfway to their mouths. Strangers started watching like it was entertainment, sensing the sudden spike in tension. This was the drama they secretly craved beneath the boredom of the ceremony, a mother confronting an interloper. It was delicious to them. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something rational, but before I could get a word out, the double doors at the end of the hall swung open. My sister, Marin, stepped out. If the wedding was a kingdom, Marin was its queen receiving tribute. She was dressed in a second look for the reception, a white silk slip dress that cost more than my entire college education. She looked radiant, glowing with the confidence of someone who has never heard the word no. She was laughing at something someone behind her had said, but the laughter died in her throat when she saw us. She looked at our mother, rigid with rage. Then she looked at me. For a second, I saw fear in her eyes. It was a flash of panic, pure and simple. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the haughty, defensive mask she had learned to wear so well. She walked over to our mother, linking her arm through hers, presenting a united front, 2 perfect women against the world. "What are you doing here?" Marin asked, her voice pitching up, performing distress for the audience that was gathering. "You aren't invited. Harper, you were never invited." The accusation hung in the air. "You aren't invited. It was more than just a statement about the wedding, it was a statement about their lives. You are not invited to our success. You are not invited to our happiness. You are not invited to be part of us. I stood there, feeling the eyes of 20 or 30 people boring into me. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, the shame that I had spent 9 years trying to outrun catching up to me in a single heartbeat. My body remembered exactly what their cruelty felt like. It felt like being small. It felt like being a mistake. It felt like standing in the kitchen at 17 while they listed all the reasons I was a disappointment, but I was not 17 anymore. I took a slow breath. I forced my hands to unclench. I kept my face smooth, calm, impassive. I let the silence stretch out, refusing to fill it with apologies or excuses. I looked at Marin, really looked at her, and saw the tremor in her hand that was clutching our mother's arm. I looked at my mother and saw the tightness around her mouth, the desperate need for control that radiated off her in waves. They wanted a scene. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to cause a disturbance so they could point their fingers and say, "See, we told you she was unstable. We told you she was the problem." They wanted to be the victims of my chaos. I would not give them that satisfaction. I addressed the audience in my head, the invisible chorus of everyone who has ever felt this specific kind of pain. If you have ever been told you are too much until you finally disappear, if you have ever been made to feel like a stain on someone else's perfect white tablecloth, do not go anywhere. Do not look away. Do not let them make you shrink. Stand your ground. Breathe through the fire. Because this is the part where the silence ends. This is the part that matters. The memory that haunts me most is not a shouting match. It is not a door slamming or a plate shattering against a wall. It is the silence of a Sunday morning, the smell of roasted coffee, and the soft scratch of a fountain pen on heavy paper. I was 17 years old. I sat at the kitchen island, my hands folded on top of a glossy brochure for the local community college. I had not asked for the Ivy League. I had not asked for a private liberal arts school in New England with equestrian stables and a study abroad program in Florence. I had asked for the terrifyingly modest sum of $3,000 a semester to attend a school 20 minutes down the road, where I could live at home and transfer the credits later. I had a plan. I had a spreadsheet. I had a part-time job lined up at a bookstore. My father took a sip of his coffee. Black, no sugar. He looked at the brochure as if it were a piece of junk mail he had fished out of the trash. Then he looked at me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was a polite smile, the kind a bank manager gives you right before he denies your loan application. "We believe in independence. Harper," he said. His voice was calm, reasonable, utterly devoid of warmth. "You are nearly an adult. If you want this, you need to earn it. We are not going to handicap you by smoothing the road. You need to learn the value of $1. I remember nodding. I remember feeling a strange, hot lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I told myself he was right. I told myself this was tough love. I told myself that they were trying to build my character, that this was a lesson in resilience that I would appreciate when I was 30. 3 days later, I watched my mother sit at the same counter and write a check for $5,000. It was a deposit for a luxury off-campus apartment complex near the State University. It was for Marin, who was a sophomore in high school at the time, Marin, who was not even going to college for another 2 years. But my mother had heard that the waiting list for this specific building was long, and she wanted to ensure Marin had the perfect environment to thrive when her time came. I stood in the doorway, holding a basket of laundry, and watched the ink dry. The hypocrisy was so blatant it felt physical, like a punch to the solar plexus. I waited until my father left the room, and then I asked. I did not scream, I just asked. I thought we believed in independence. I said. My mother capped her pen. She turned on her stool, the silk of her robe swishing softly against the leather. She looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance, as if I were a toddler asking why I could not eat candy for dinner. "That is different," she said. "How is it different?" I asked. Marin has potential. She said. The words were simple, but they landed like darts. She did not raise her voice. She just stated it as a fact, as undeniable as gravity. Marin is an investment. You, Harper, are an attitude problem. We are not going to throw good money after bad. When you fix your disposition, maybe we can talk. But until then, you are on your own. I realized then that the rules were never about money. My parents had plenty of money. They had renovated the kitchen twice in 5 years just because they grew bored of the tile. They went on wine tours in France. This was not about resources. It was about worthiness. In their eyes, Marin was the protagonist of the family story, the shining star who deserved to be polished and displayed. I was the antagonist, the sullen, difficult child who needed to be disciplined into submission or erased entirely. So I started working. I did not take the bookstore job. It did not pay enough. Instead, I took the opening shift at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the truckers stopped at 4 a.m. and the air always smelled of bacon grease and stale cigarettes. I woke up at 3:30 every single morning while the rest of the house was silent and dark. I crept out to my used car, praying the engine would turn over, and drove through the empty streets to pour coffee for 6 hours before going to high school. My grades slipped. Of course they slipped. I was exhausted. I was falling asleep in a P English. I was skipping lunch to nap in my car. But I was making money. I was stacking singles and fives in a shoebox under my bed, counting them every night like a dragon guarding a hoard. Then my parents instituted a new rule. Since I was working like an adult, I should contribute like an adult. They demanded 30% of my earnings as rent for my bedroom. I tried to argue. I told them I was saving for tuition. I told them I was trying to do exactly what they asked. My father just shrugged. Welcome to the real world. Harper, he said, taxes and rent wait for no one. If you do not like it, you can find somewhere else to live. I paid them. I handed over envelopes of greasy cash every Friday, watching my tuition fund grow smaller and smaller. I stopped buying lunch at school. I stopped going out with friends. I turned into a ghost in my own life, existing only to work and sleep and endure. The final blow came in the spring. When the financial aid forms were due, I had done the research. I knew that because I was under 24. The government considered me a dependent. I could not qualify for grants or loans without my parents' tax information. I needed their signatures. I needed them to fill out a form that would cost them absolutely nothing, a form that simply acknowledged I existed and that they were not paying for my school. I brought the paperwork to them on a Tuesday night. I had organized everything. I had highlighted the lines they needed to sign. I had even prepared a speech about how this would not affect their credit score, how it was just a formality. My father did not even look at the papers. He was watching the evening news. We are not signing that, he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dad, it costs you nothing. I said, it is just for the government. If you do not sign this, I get zero aid. I cannot afford the tuition on my own, even with the job. He muted the television and turned to me. His face was hard. We are not going to put our financial details into a federal database for you to squander, he said, and we are certainly not going to sign a document that claims we are refusing to support you. It makes us look bad. It implies we are negligent. But you are refusing to support me. I said, my voice was shaking. That is exactly what is happening. That is your interpretation. My mother chimed in from the sofa. We are teaching you resilience. If you wanted this enough, you would find a way. You are just looking for a handout. We will not be party to your laziness. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the papers in my hand, the papers that represented my only ticket out of that house, and realized they were worthless. They had locked the door and thrown away the key, and they were blaming me for not being able to walk through the wall. I did not cry that night. I was done crying. Something inside me, some soft, hopeful part that still believed they might love me if I just tried hard enough, finally died. It calcified into something hard and cold and necessary. I went to my room and counted my money. I had $1,200. It was not enough for college. It was barely enough for a security deposit on a cheap apartment and a month of ramen noodles, but it was enough to leave. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly moving my things. I took one box at a time out to my car so they would not notice. I cleared out my closet, leaving just enough clothes hanging so it looked full at a glance. I packed my birth certificate, my social security card, the few photos I had where I looked happy, the night before I left. I came home late from a double shift. The house was dark, but I saw the blue light of the television flickering in the den. My parents were awake. I paused in the hallway, my hand on the banister, listening. They were laughing. It was a relaxed, intimate sound, the sound of a couple sharing a private joke over a glass of wine. "Do you think she will actually last?" my father asked. My mother laughed again, a light, tinkering sound. "Oh, please. She has no idea what the world costs. She will be back in a month. 6 weeks, tops. And when she comes back," my father asked. My mother's voice dropped, but it was clear enough to cut through the drywall. "When she comes back, she agrees to our terms. No more of this sullen victim act. She falls in line. We break the attitude. Graham. Once she gets hungry enough, she will sign whatever we want her to sign just to get a hot meal." I stood frozen in the dark. They were betting on my failure. They were not just indifferent to my struggle. They were actively rooting for it. They wanted me to fail so they could own me again. They wanted me to crawl back on my hands and knees so they could have the satisfaction of picking me up and dusting me off and telling me I was nothing without them. That was the moment. That was the exact second I decided I would rather starve in a gutter than ever step foot in this house again. I went upstairs. I did not go to sleep. I opened my laptop. I knew, even then, that memory is a slippery thing. I knew that in 5 years, or 10 years, they would rewrite this story. They would tell people they did everything they could. They would tell people I was mentally unstable, that I ran away for no reason, that I was ungrateful and wild. They would paint over the truth until it looked like one of their perfect holiday cards. So I started collecting receipts. I logged into the family email server. My father had never changed the password from the default setting. I found the email chains between them and the financial planner where they discussed setting up a trust for Marin's education, while explicitly noting that my expenses were to be zeroed out. I found the emails where I had sent them the links to the financial aid requirements, and their replies refusing to engage. I downloaded them all. I went through my phone. I exported the voicemails my mother had left me, the ones where her voice was sweet as poison, telling me I was selfish for asking for help. I took screenshots of the text messages where my father demanded his rent money on the same day I told him I needed to buy textbooks. I created a folder on a secure cloud drive. I named it simply Evidence. I did not do it for revenge. I did not have the power for revenge back then. I was a 17-year-old girl with $1,200 in a beat-up sedan. I did it for sanity. I did it so that one day, when the gaslighting became too heavy, when the world tried to tell me that my parents were saints and I was the sinner, I could open that folder and look at the truth. I did it so I would never, ever forget why I was leaving. I left at 4 a.m, just like I was going to work. I did not leave a note. I did not say goodbye. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and dropped the key through the mail slot. As it clattered onto the floor inside, I felt a weight lift off my chest, sudden and violent. I got in my car and drove. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I did not look at the house that had never been a home. I drove toward the highway, toward the sunrise, toward a life that was terrifying and uncertain and completely, wonderfully mine. Freedom is not a montage set to an upbeat pop song. It does not feel like wind in your hair or an open road. In the beginning, freedom feels entirely like panic. The first 3 months after I left were a blur of sleeping on sofas that smelled like wet dog and eating peanut butter straight from the jar, because I could not afford bread. I learned very quickly that independence has a price tag, and that price tag is usually hidden in the fine print of a lease agreement. I moved into a studio apartment that was barely larger than the walk-in closet in my parents' master bedroom. It was in a complex called The Pines, though there was not a single pine tree within 5 miles. Only a cracked parking lot and a dumpster that was permanently overflowing. The rent was $600 a month. That sounds cheap now, but back then, it felt like a ransom demand. I learned adult life by blunt force trauma. I learned that electricity requires a deposit. I learned that if you miss a credit card payment by one day, the interest rate spikes like a fever. I learned that landlords do not care about your sob story. They care about the 1st and the 15th. I became obsessed with the mechanics of survival. I tracked every single penny. If I spent 75 cents on a pack of gum, I wrote it down in a notebook. I had to. There was no safety net. There was no phone call I could make if I fell short. If I failed, I would end up on the street. And that would mean my parents were right. That fear was a more potent stimulant than caffeine. I worked 2 jobs. By day, I was a receptionist at a dental office, filing charts and getting yelled at by people who were angry about their copays. By night, I restocked shelves at a big box hardware store, lifting boxes of tile and paint cans until my arms shook, in the gaps between those shifts. I took online classes, I did my homework on the bus, I read textbooks on my lunch break while chewing on stale sandwiches. I existed in a state of permanent, vibrating exhaustion. It was the kind of tired that settles in your marrow and turns your bones into sand. I would wake up in the morning and have to physically command my legs to swing out of bed, counting down the seconds until I could close my eyes again. There was a moment, about 6 months in, where I almost broke. My car, the beat-up sedan that was my lifeline, needed a new transmission. The mechanic quoted me $1,200. I had $300 in my bank account. I sat on the curb outside the shop and stared at the oil stains on the pavement, trying to figure out if I could sell plasma or if I could live without a car in a city with terrible public transit. That was when I ran into Mason Pike. Mason was an acquaintance of my father. He was a quiet, unassuming man who ran a local insurance agency. He had been to the house for dinner parties a few times, always sitting on the periphery, drinking scotch and listening more than he spoke. He saw me sitting on that curb, wiping grease off my cheek, and he pulled his truck over. He did not ask me why I was there. He did not ask where my parents were. He just asked me what was wrong with the car. When I told him, he went inside, spoke to the mechanic, and came back out. Fix it, he told me. I will cover it. You can pay me back $50 a month. 0 interest. I looked at him. Suspicious. I was 18 years old and I had learned that nobody gives you anything without strings attached. Why, I asked. Why would you do that? Mason looked at me for a long moment. He had kind eyes, tired eyes. He took a pen out of his pocket and wrote his number on the back of a receipt, because I was in that dining room. Harper, he said quietly, I heard how they talked to you when they thought no one was listening. I froze. I had spent so years thinking I was crazy, thinking I was overreacting, thinking that maybe I really was the difficult, ungrateful child they said I was. You are not crazy, he said, as if reading my mind. They are like that. They have always been like that. You got out. Stay out. He co-signed the repair bill. I paid him back every single month, on the 1st of the month, for 2 years. I never missed a payment. That interaction did something to me. It validated my reality. It was the first crack of light in a very dark room. It proved that my version of the story was not fiction. I decided then that I needed a career that dealt in absolute truths. I was done with feelings. Feelings could be manipulated. Feelings could be weaponized. I wanted facts. I wanted black and white. I wanted a world where rules were rules and they applied to everyone, regardless of their last name or their bank account. I chose compliance. It sounds boring to most people. It sounds like paperwork and red tape. To me, it sounded like armor. I switched my major to business administration with a focus on regulatory compliance and information systems. I wanted to understand the systems that governed the world. I wanted to know how money moved, how fraud was hidden, and how to find the smoking gun. I landed an entry-level role at a firm called Bright Ledger Compliance Group. It was not a glamorous job. I was a junior analyst, which meant I spent 10 hours a day staring at spreadsheets, cross-referencing expense reports for mid-sized companies, Most people hated it. I loved it. I loved the order of it. I loved that if a number was in the wrong column, it was an error that could be fixed. It was binary. It was correct. Or it was incorrect. There was no gaslighting in a spreadsheet. I built my life with the same rigidity. I became a hoarder of documentation. It was a trauma response that I masqueraded as professional diligence. I kept folders for everything. I scanned every lease, every utility bill, every medical record. I backed them up to hard drives, and then I backed up the hard drives to the cloud. I kept a timeline of my life, annotated with receipts. Because my family's favorite weapon was rewriting reality, I made sure my reality was etched in stone. If anyone ever challenged me, if anyone ever tried to tell me that something did not happen, I could pull up a file and say, here is the date, here is the time, here is the proof. It was during my 3rd year at Bright Ledger that I met Sloan. She was a consultant for a partner firm, brought in to help with a massive healthcare audit we were managing. She was sharp, articulate, and terrifyingly competent. We were working late one night, ordering takeout in a conference room surrounded by stacks of files. She saw the photo on my desk. It was just me and my cat. No family photos, no parents, no siblings. She did not ask. Most people asked. Most people probed. Where are you from? Do you have brothers and sisters? Do you go home for Thanksgiving? Sloan just handed me a carton of noodles and started talking about the discrepancies she had found in the vendor contracts. She respected boundaries like they were physical walls. She realized I had history, but she did not demand to inspect the wreckage over time. That professional respect turned into friendship, and friendship turned into love. Sloan was the first person I told about my parents. I did not tell her the whole sob story all at once. I gave it to her in pieces, like fragments of a map. She never flinched. She never tried to play devil's advocate. She never said, "But they are your family. You should forgive them." She just listened, and she held my hand, and she let me be Harper, not the damaged girl who ran away. I did not win overnight. That is the part the movies skip. They show the montage of the girl studying and then cut to her in a corner office wearing a power suit. They miss the years in between. They miss the nights I cried myself to sleep because I missed a mother who did not exist. They miss the panic attacks I had in the grocery store when I saw a woman who looked like Marin. They miss the loneliness of spending Christmas Day ordering Chinese food and watching marathons of old sitcoms because I had nowhere else to go. I outlasted them. That was my victory. I survived paycheck by paycheck, semester by semester, promotion by promotion. 9 years later, I was no longer the junior analyst. I was a senior compliance officer. I led teams. I walked into boardrooms and told CEOs that they were non-compliant. I helped companies stop fraud. I stopped manipulation. I stopped the pretty lies that people tell to cover up their greed. I was good at it because I knew exactly what a lie looked like. I knew that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. I knew that if a story is too perfect, it is almost certainly false. I had built a life. It was a quiet life, a safe life, a life that belonged entirely to me. I had Sloan. I had a beautiful apartment with big windows and a doorman. I had a savings account that could weather a storm. I truly, honestly thought I was done with the past. I thought I had outrun the ghost of the Parker family. I thought the wall I had built was high enough and thick enough to keep them out forever. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the mail arrived. It was a heavy envelope, cream-colored, with calligraphy so precise it looked like it had been printed by a machine. My address was handwritten on the front. I did not recognize the return address, but I recognized the paper. It was the same paper my mother used for her annual holiday party invitations. Textured, expensive, the kind of paper that whispers money. I stood in my kitchen, the envelope heavy in my hand. The sun was streaming in, but the room suddenly felt cold. Sloan was in the other room, on a call. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was an invitation, together with their families. Marin Elizabeth Parker and Graham Thomas Sutter request the honor of your presence. It was not addressed to the Parker family. It was addressed to Ms. Sloane Reynolds, and guessed. The air left my lungs. My sister was getting married, and she was marrying into the world that Sloane moved in. The donor circle, the hospital executives, the very network of people I audited, the network Sloane consulted for. Fate does not just have a sense of humor, it has a sense of cruelty. I stared at the name, Maren Elizabeth Parker, and then I looked at the date. It was in 3 weeks, in Charleston. I could have thrown it away. I could have burned it in the sink. I could have told Sloane I was busy, or sick, or simply unwilling to go, but as I stared at that elegant, looping script, something hot and hard sparked in my chest. They had erased me. They had bet on my failure. They had laughed about how I would crawl back. I was not crawling. I was standing, and I realized, with a sudden, terrifying clarity, that I did not want to hide anymore. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to see that I had survived without their money, without their approval, and without their love. I put the invitation down on the counter. My hand was steady. The past has a talent for finding you, no matter how far you run. But this time, I was not running. I was waiting. The invitation sat on our kitchen island for 3 days, unopened, like a suspicious package that might contain anthracite. When Sloane finally sliced through the seal, she did it with the same precision she used to dissect corporate mergers. She pulled out the thick cardstock, read it, and then set it down without a word. She did not look at me. She looked at the fridge, at the coffee maker, at the window anywhere but my face. It was not a family invitation. That was the first thing I had to understand. My parents had not had a sudden change of heart. They had not spent the last decade pining for their lost daughter, wondering if she was happy or healthy or alive. This was business, pure, unadulterated networking. The groom, Graham Sutter, was the scion of a family that practically owned the hospital network Sloane consulted for. Her firm was currently overseeing a massive donor compliance restructure for their charitable arm. She was on the guest list because she was valuable assets management. I picked up the RSVP card. There, printed in small but polite font on the line designated for the guest, was my name, Harper James. It was spelled correctly. It looked official. It looked like permission. Sloane leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "You do not have to go," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of pressure. "I can go alone. I can take a colleague. I can send a gift and claim we have the flu. You do not have to step foot in that city." Harper. I stared at my name. For 9 years. I had treated Charleston like a quarantine zone. I had avoided the entire state of South Carolina. I had blocked numbers, filtered emails, and trained myself to flinch at the sound of a Southern accent. I had built a fortress of silence to keep them out. But looking at that card, I realized that a fortress is just another kind of prison. If I stayed home, if I hid in our apartment while Sloane went to face them, I was still letting them dictate my geography. I was still the 17-year-old girl running away in the dark. "I want to go," I said. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. Sloane looked at me, her eyebrows pulling together. "Are you sure?" "No," I said honestly. "I am not sure at all. But I need to know that I can stand in a room with them and not disintegrate. I need to know that I exist outside of their shadow." We established ground rules immediately. This was not a vacation. It was a tactical operation. We would drive down on Friday morning for the rehearsal dinner, stay for the ceremony on Saturday, and leave immediately after the reception. We booked a hotel on the other side of the city, far away from the historic district where my parents lived. We agreed on a code word. If I said the word archived, it meant we were leaving. No questions asked. No polite goodbyes. We would just walk out the door and get in the car. I rehearsed neutrality in the mirror. I practiced a smile that was polite but vacant, a shield that deflected curiosity without inviting conversation. I told myself that I was not Harper James, the rejected daughter. I was Harper James, the senior compliance officer. I was an observer. I was a camera. Cameras do not have feelings. Cameras do not cry. The drive took 5 hours. As we crossed the state line, the landscape began to change. The trees got taller, draped in the gray lace of Spanish moss. The air grew heavier, thick with humidity and salt. My stomach turned over, a slow, sickening rotation. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, and suddenly, I was 16 again. I remembered the last time my mother had touched me. It was not a hug. It was in the foyer of our house. 2 days before I asked about community college, I had been wearing a sweater she disliked. She said it looked cheap. She had grabbed my wrist, her fingers circling the bone so tightly that her nails left crescent moons in my skin. She had pulled my arm up to inspect the fabric, sneering at the pilling wool. "You represent us," she had hissed, her breath smelling of peppermint and ice. "Stop looking like a stray." I looked down at my wrist now. There were no marks. The skin was smooth. I rubbed the spot with my thumb. Grounding myself in the present, I was wearing a blazer that I had paid for with my own money. I was sitting in a car that was registered in my name. I was free. I pulled out my phone to distract myself and opened the browser. I had avoided looking at the wedding website until now, afraid of what I might see. But the auditor in me needed to know the terrain. I needed to know the narrative they were selling. The website was a masterpiece of digital vanity. Professional photos of Marin and Graham in white linen, laughing on a sailboat, walking through a vineyard, holding hands on a cobblestone street. They looked like royalty. I scrolled down to the About the Couple section. Marin is a graduate of Vanderbilt University and currently holds a medical doctorate, serving as the lead consultant for pediatric neurology interactions at... I stopped scrolling. I read the sentence again. Medical doctorate. I did the math in my head. I left when I was 17 and Marin was 15. That was 9 years ago. Marin would be 24. Maybe barely 25, depending on her birthday. To have a medical doctorate, she would have needed 4 years of undergraduate studies, followed by 4 years of medical school. That is 8 years minimum. Assuming she took 0 breaks, passed every class, and got into medical school immediately at 21, it was technically possible. Barely, if the timeline was perfect. But the title was wrong. Lead consultant for pediatric neurology interactions. You do not consult on neurology right out of medical school. You go into residency. Residency takes 3 to 7 years. You are a resident, an intern, a junior doctor. You are not a lead consultant. That is a title for someone with experience, someone with tenure, or someone who is working in an administrative capacity that does not require a license. It was a splinter, a tiny, sharp inconsistency that snagged in my brain. I thought about Marin's grades in high school. She was not a bad student, but she hated science. She had failed chemistry twice. She used to pay me $20 to write her biology lab reports because she couldn't stand the vocabulary, the idea of her grinding through organic chemistry, the MCATs, and the brutal sleep deprivation of medical school seemed dissonant. "It is not my business," I whispered to myself. "What isn't?" Sloan asked. Glancing over from the driver's seat, I locked the phone screen. Nothing. Just the timeline. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. In my line of work, a small lie is rarely lonely. A small lie is usually the tip of an iceberg that goes down into the freezing dark. I pushed the thought away. I was not here to audit my sister. I was here to survive her. We arrived at the venue for the rehearsal dinner just as the sun was setting. It was a private club downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather armchairs, the kind of place where men smoked cigars and decided the fate of the municipal bond market. We walked in, and I felt the air change. It was the specific atmosphere of wealth protecting itself. I kept my head high, my hand resting lightly on Sloane's arm. We found our names on a seating chart near the back, perfect, far enough to be invisible, close enough to watch. My parents were at the head table. Seeing them was like looking at a photograph that had been left in the sun. They looked the same, but faded. My father's hair was whiter. My mother's face was tighter, likely the result of very expensive dermatology. They were holding court, laughing, touching people on the shoulder with that practiced benevolence that used to fool everyone, including me. Marin was sitting between them, glowing. She looked beautiful. I had to admit that. But she also looked frantic. Her eyes were darting around the room, checking the exits, checking the glasses, checking the guests. She looked like someone who was waiting for a bomb to go off. Dinner was served. Speeches began. I sat there and listened to people praise the monsters who had raised me. Graham's father stood up first. He was a large man with a booming voice. "We are so thrilled to welcome Maren into the family," he said, raising a glass of scotch. "And we are equally thrilled to align with the Parker family. Their generosity, their support of the arts, and their unwavering commitment to their children is an inspiration to us all." I took a sip of water to keep from choking. Unwavering commitment. Then a bridesmaid stood up. She was a girl I vaguely recognized from Maren's high school years. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker are practically saints," she gushed into the microphone. I remember how they supported Maren through those grueling years of pre-med. They were always there, cheering her on, making sure she had everything she needed to save the world. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest. A dark, hysterical thing. Saints. The same saints who had told me I was an attitude problem for asking for tuition assistance. The same saints who had bet on my starvation. The irony was so thick, I could almost chew it. Sloane squeezed my hand under the table. Her grip was firm, grounding. I looked at her and saw that she was not laughing. She was watching my parents with a cold, clinical detachment. She knew. She was the only person in the room who knew the ledger was red. I looked back at the head table. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, performing humility. My father was nodding solemnly, accepting the praise as his due. They were basking in it. They had constructed a perfect cathedral of lies, and they were worshipping at their own altar. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. I had been afraid of them. For 9 years, I had been afraid of their judgment, their voices, their power to make me feel small. But looking at them now, preening over a toast that was built on fiction, I did not feel small. I felt dangerous. I knew something they did not know. I knew that structures built on lies always collapse. It is simply a matter of physics. You cannot cheat gravity forever. I watched Maren down her third glass of champagne. I watched the way my father's smile flickered when Graham asked him a question about the trust fund distribution. I watched the way my mother steered the conversation away from specifics whenever someone asked about Maren's residency program. They were terrified. They were not strong. They were brittle. They were walking a tightrope over a canyon, and they were terrified that a stiff breeze would knock them off. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lilies and roasted beef. I made a decision then and there. I would not scream. I would not make a scene. I would not flip the table or demand an apology they were incapable of giving. I would simply witness. I would be the compliance officer in the back of the room, taking notes. I would not start the fire. I had no interest in arson. But I knew, with the instinct of someone who hunts fraud for a living, that there was already a gas leak in this room. They had brought the matches. They had poured the gasoline. If they decided to strike a match, if they decided to push me, if they decided to try to erase me one more time, I would not stand in the smoke. I would not choke on their exhaust. I would let the house burn, and I would watch it fall. I squeezed Sloane's hand back. I am ready. I thought, let them try. The air in the hallway seemed to vibrate, charged with the specific, high-frequency electricity of a social disaster unfolding in real time. Maren stood before me, her chest heaving beneath the white silk of her reception dress. Her face flushed not with bridal joy, but with the frantic, cornered energy of an animal that senses a predator. But I was not the predator. I was simply a mirror, and she could not stand her own reflection. "You crashed," Maren announced. Her voice was not a whisper. It was a projection, pitched perfectly to bounce off the marble floors and echo into the vaulted ceiling where the guests were mingling. She was ensuring an audience. "You actually crashed my wedding. I knew you were jealous. Harper. But this is pathetic." I felt the blood drain from my extremities, centering in my chest, a cold, hard knot of adrenaline. This was the narrative they had chosen. They could not admit I was a successful woman attending a professional obligation. That would destroy their story of the failed, wayward daughter. So, they had to rewrite reality instantly. In their version, I was the obsessor. I was the ghost who refused to stay dead. I am not crashing, I said. My voice was low, steady, a direct contrast to her hysteria. I kept my hands clasped loosely in front of me, a posture I used in boardrooms when delivering bad news to shareholders. I am here with my partner. We were invited, liar. Maren shouted. She took a step back, performing fear for the benefit of the 3 couples who had stopped near the entrance to the ballroom. She always lies. She has always been like this. My mother stepped forward then, moving with the fluid, predatory grace of a shark entering chummed water. She placed a hand on Maren's shoulder, a gesture that looked comforting but was actually restraining. She looked at me with an expression of profound, tragic disappointment. It was a look she had perfected over 20 years. "Harper," she said, her voice dropping to a mournful register that practically begged the bystanders to sympathize with her burden. "Please, do not do this here. We tried to help you. We gave you every opportunity, but you chose the hard way. Why must you bring your chaos into your sister's one moment of happiness?" The gaslighting was so seamless, so professionally executed, that for a split second, I almost questioned my own sanity. "We tried to help you." The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They had cut me off. They had mocked my poverty. They had actively bet on my failure. But here, under the crystal chandeliers, they were the benevolent parents, and I was the prodigal disaster. My father joined the formation, completing the wall. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking at me with the same cold detachment he used to dismiss waiters. "It is about structure." "Harper," he said, his voice booming slightly, the way he spoke when he was giving a toast or a keynote speech. Some people understand gratitude and the social contract. Some people refuse to accept that actions have consequences. You cannot simply wander back in here after years of silence and expect to be celebrated. Guests were beginning to gather now. The murmuring started, a low buzz of whispers that felt like insects crawling on my skin. I could hear snippets of it. Is that the sister I thought she was in rehab? No. I heard she ran away with a mechanic. Look at her dress. She is trying to upstage the bride. This was their favorite sport. It was public character assassination, performed with the efficiency of a firing squad. They were stripping me of my dignity, layer by layer, in front of the very people whose validation they craved. They were banking on the fact that I would break. They expected the 17-year-old girl who used to cry in the kitchen. They expected me to scream, to defend myself, to look crazy. I did not scream. I did not cry. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting their accusations settle in the air. I repeated my sentence, word for word, with the same flat intonation. "I am here with my partner. We were invited." Maren's face twisted. The calm was not working for her. She needed me to be volatile to justify her panic. When I refused to give her the reaction she wanted, she escalated. "You were not invited," she shrieked, abandoning the grieving sister act for pure malice. "You are a fraud, Harper. You failed out of school because you could not hack it, and now you show up here trying to leech off our success. You always needed attention. You are sick. Failed out of school. I thought of my diploma, framed in my office. I thought of the late nights, the double shifts, the honors designation on my degree. I thought of the certification exams I had passed on the first try, exams that had a 40% fail rate. The lie was so lazy, so easily disprovable, that it almost made me laugh. But I knew that in this moment, facts did not matter. Perception mattered, and they were painting a masterpiece of perception. My mother sighed, a sound of long-suffering martyrdom. She looked at the guests, offering a small, apologetic smile, as if to say, "You see what we have to deal with?" She turned back to me, her eyes hard as flint. "Why is the missing piece here?" she asked again, sneering the words. There it was, the reprise, the missing piece. It was not a term of endearment. It was an insult. It implied that I was a fragment, a shard, something broken that did not fit into the whole. I was the error in their family portrait, the glitch in their software. I looked at Sloane, who had stepped up beside me. Her face was a mask of cold fury, but she stayed silent, following my lead. She knew that if she intervened, they would just attack her too. This was my battle. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. I had proven to myself that I could stand in the same room as them and not turn to dust. I did not need to win this argument. I did not need to convince these strangers of my worth. The truth was sitting in a secure server in my apartment, and the truth was sitting in my bank account. I took a deep breath. I am leaving. I said quietly, not because you are making me, but because I have better places to be. I turned on my heel. I was ready to walk away. I was ready to let them have their little victory in the hallway. I would leave, and I would never look back. But Marin could not let it end there. She could not let me walk away with my dignity intact. She needed to crush me. She needed to ensure that I could never, ever return. Security, she yelled, her voice cracking. Someone get security. I want her removed, and I want it documented. I stopped. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Documented. I turned back slowly. Marin was clutching her phone now, her fingers white-knuckled. I am calling Doctor. Aris, she spat. I am going to have him write a report on this. I am going to have a record of your harassment. If you ever try to come near us again, I will have a paper trail that proves you are mentally unfit. The hallway went silent. Something clicked in my brain. It was the sound of a tumbler falling into place in a lock. They were not just humiliating me. This was not just a family spat. This was a strategy. I looked at Marin's frantic face. I looked at my parents' grim determination. They were terrified of what I might say. They were terrified of the truth coming out. So they were building a preemptive defense. If they could create a documented history of my instability, if they could get a friendly doctor to sign an affidavit saying I was the aggressor, then anything I said in the future could be dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic. They were building a compliance file against me. They were trying to bury me under a mountain of fabricated evidence so that if I ever tried to expose the trust fund fraud or the student loan identity theft, no one would believe me. A cold rage washed over me. It was not the hot, teary anger of my youth. It was the absolute zero of space. It was the feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a ledger that proved someone was stealing millions. You want to document this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I looked Marin dead in the eye. Be very careful what you write down, Marin, because paper trails work both ways. My mother stepped forward, sensing the shift in my tone, sensing that she was losing control of the narrative. Get out, she hissed. Just get out before we... The double doors at the end of the hall opened again. A silence fell over the group, heavier and more sudden than before. The guests parted like the Red Sea. It was the groom. Graham Sutter walked into the hallway. He looked like the picture of a modern prince. His tuxedo was tailored to the millimeter. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and a relaxed, easy smile on his face. He looked like a man who owned the world and knew it. What is going on out here? He asked, his voice light, good-natured. I thought I heard... He stopped. He saw Marin, flushed and trembling. He saw my parents, standing like sentinels, and then he saw me. The color did not just drain from his face, it vanished. He went from a healthy, sun-kissed tan to the color of wet parchment in the span of a single heartbeat. His smile didn't fade, it simply fell off his face. He froze, his eyes locked onto mine, wide with a recognition that had absolutely nothing to do with family weddings. Marin rushed to him, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him into her orbit. Graham, tell them to kick her out, she cried, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is crazy. She is trying to ruin everything. Tell them Graham did not look at her. He did not look at my parents. He did not look at the security guard who was jogging down the hall. He was looking at me, and he looked terrified. He took a step forward, ignoring his bride. His voice was no longer the booming voice of the confident groom. It was tight, strangled. Harper, he said. Harper James. My mother let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Do not bother with her name, Graham. She is nobody." But Graham was not listening to her. He was looking at me like I was a ghost who had walked out of a nightmare and into his wedding reception. He knew me. He knew me from 6 months ago. He knew me from a conference room in Atlanta where I had sat across from him and his division heads. He knew me as the lead auditor who had flagged a series of irregular transactions in his family's charitable foundation. He knew me as the woman who had asked him very uncomfortable questions about donor compliance and offshore routing numbers. He knew me as the person who had not accepted his charming deflections. The hallway went silent in that specific way rich spaces get when power rearranges itself. The guests stopped murmuring. They sensed the shift. They sensed that the dynamic had just flipped upside down. Marin tugged on his arm again. Desperate. "Graham, what are you doing? She is lying. She always lies." Graham pulled his arm away from her. It was a subtle movement, but it was a rejection. He did not take his eyes off me. "Ms. James?" he said, using my professional title. The formality hit the group like a bucket of ice water. My father frowned. "Graham." "You know her." Graham swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob. He looked at Sloane, recognizing her too, and the panic in his eyes doubled. He realized, in that second, exactly what was happening. He realized that the crazy sister his fiancée had complained about and the terrifying auditor who held his family's reputation in her hands were the same person. He looked at my mother, then at Marin, and then back at me. The realization washed over him my parents had just spent 10 minutes publicly humiliating the one woman who had the power to sign off on the audit that could save or destroy his family's business. My parents realized too late that they had made a catastrophic error. They had picked a public fight in front of people who understood risk. And Graham Sutter was looking at me not with contempt, but with the desperate, pleading fear of a man who knows he has just been caught in a trap he helped build. The silence that followed Graham's entrance was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath, the kind that happens right before a car crash. The hallway, moments ago filled with the sharp, staccato rhythm of my family's insults, was now a vacuum. Graham Sutter stood 5 feet away from me. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first apartment, but at that moment, he looked like a man who had shown up to a gunfight armed with a cocktail napkin. His tan had evaporated. His eyes were wide, fixed on my face with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. I knew exactly what he was seeing. He was not seeing his fiancée's estranged failure of a sister. He was seeing the lead compliance officer who had sat across a mahogany table from him 4 months ago in a high-rise in Atlanta. He was seeing the woman who had slid a binder across that table and asked him to explain $300,000 in unverified vendor payments related to his family's hospital expansion project. He was seeing the auditor who had not smiled, had not laughed at his jokes, and had ultimately flagged his division for a Level 3 review. Marin, oblivious to the temperature of the room, tried to reclaim the narrative. She stepped forward, her hand tightening on Graham's arm, her nails digging into the fabric of his jacket. "Graham," she said, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of rage and victimhood. Tell them to kick her out. She is crashing. She is ruining our night." Graham did not look at her. He did not move his arm. He did not blink. "Harper James," he asked. His voice was tight, strangled, stripped of all its social lubrication. It was not a greeting. It was a verification of a nightmare. My mother laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound, designed to cut the tension and reassert her dominance. She stepped between us, her silver dress shimmering like armor. "Oh, Graham, do not bother," she said, waving a hand dismissively in my direction. "Do not give her the satisfaction of using her name. She is just acting out. She has been desperate for attention since she was a child. We will have security remove her, and we can go back to the party." She reached out to guide Graham away, treating him like a valuable asset that needed to be steered away from a mess. Graham pulled away from her. It was a sharp, physical recoil. He looked at my mother as if she had just offered him a glass of poison. Then he looked back at me. The color was returning to his face, but it was not a healthy flush. It was the red blotchiness of stress. "You are Marin's sister?" he asked. The question came out flat, heavy with implication. I did not smile. I did not soften. I kept my face exactly as it had been in that boardroom in Atlanta. I said. Graham ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Messing it up." He let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "My God," he whispered. Marin looked between us, her confusion curdling into panic. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that there was a conversation happening that she did not understand, a language being spoken that she did not speak. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Why are you talking to her? She is a dropout. Graham, she is a nobody." "No," Graham said. He said it loudly, sharply, cutting her off. He turned to the crowd. He looked at the donors standing by the wall, the men and women who controlled the endowments, the board members of the hospital network. He saw them watching. He saw the calculation in their eyes. "She is not a nobody," Graham said, his voice grim. "This is Harper James. She is the senior lead auditor for the Sterling Compliance Group." The room went deadly silent. If he had said I was an astronaut or a movie star, it might have caused a stir, but naming my firm and my specific title dropped a bomb into the middle of the hallway, in this circle, in this specific tax bracket. Sterling Compliance Group was not just a company name, it was a verdict. We were the people you called when you wanted to ensure your nonprofit status was safe. We were also the people who stripped that status away when we found fraud. My mother frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She looked at Graham, then at me, trying to process this new data point that refused to fit into her old equation. "I do not understand," my mother said, her voice losing some of its edge. "What are you talking about?" "Graham Harper works in computers. She fixes computers." Graham looked at her with a profound, exhausted pity. "She oversees the compliance protocols for the entire Southeast donor network. Mrs. Parker," Graham said, specifically, "she oversees the grant renewal for the Sutter Health expansion. The grant that is paying for this wedding reception's venue. The grant that half the people in this room are currently invested in." He gestured vaguely to the chandeliers, the champagne, the opulence around us. "My team audits the flow of those funds." I added, my voice was calm, projecting easily to the back of the group. "We ensure that charitable donations are used for charitable purposes, not for personal image management." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My father, who had been standing back with a look of bored superiority, suddenly went rigid. He understood money. He understood risk. And he just realized that the daughter he had treated like a disposal problem was currently holding the detonator to his social standing. Marin, however, was still fighting the old war. She could not pivot. She could not accept a reality where I was powerful and she was vulnerable. "That is a lie," she screamed. She stomped her foot, a petulant, childish gesture that looked grotesque in a wedding gown. "She is lying. She always lies. She probably looked that up on the internet. She failed out of college. She waited tables. She looked around the circle of guests, desperate for an ally. Why is everyone listening to her? She is a fraud." Sloan stepped forward then. She moved with the quiet authority of someone who spends her life in rooms where decisions are made. She did not look at Marin. She looked at Graham. "She is not lying." "Mr. Sutter," Sloan said. Graham looked at Sloan, and I saw the moment he recognized her too. He recognized the consultant who worked with his father's board. "Sloan Reynolds," Graham said, his voice hollow. Sloan nodded. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, sleek business card. She did not hand it to Graham. She handed it to the man standing next to him, Mr. Vance, my father's business associate, the man who had ignored me in the grocery store years ago. "Harper James is the lead auditor on the account," Sloan stated, her voice cool and factual. She has a Master of Science in Forensic Accounting and holds the highest clearance level at our firm. We are here tonight as guests of the board. Mr. Vance looked at the card. He looked at me. He looked at my father. And then, quite deliberately, he took a half step away from my parents. It was a small movement, but it was a landslide. The energy in the hallway shifted violently. The guests were no longer spectators at a family drama. They were witnesses to a liability. They were rich people, and rich people are allergic to scrutiny. They looked at my parents not with admiration, but with calculation. If the Parkers were bullying a federal-level compliance officer, what else were they hiding? What kind of judgment did they possess? Graham looked at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He was not looking at me with hatred. He was looking at me with the realization that his new in-laws had just tried to publicly destroy the one person who could single-handedly freeze his family's assets. I didn't know. Graham stammered. He looked at Marin, and for the first time, there was revulsion in his eyes. Marin, you told me you said she was a drifter. You said she was mentally unstable. I said she is, Marin cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Look at her. She is trying to ruin my wedding. She is not trying to ruin it. Graham snapped. His voice cracked like a whip. She is the auditor. Marin, do you have any idea what you have just done? My mother tried to intervene, sensing the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She put on her most charming smile, though it looked stretched and ghastly. Graham, darling, let's not overreact, she cooed, reaching for his arm again. I am sure there is a misunderstanding. Harper has always been prone to exaggeration. We can sort this out quietly. Perhaps Harper should just leave. Graham looked at my mother. He looked at the way she was trying to smooth over the cracks, the way she was trying to dismiss the reality standing in front of her. Mrs. Parker, Graham said, his voice shaking, you just accused a senior auditor of fraud in front of the hospital board. You just threatened to have her dragged out by security and documented as mentally unstable. He gestured to the guests, who were now whispering furiously. Phones coming out to text the news to the rest of the ballroom. There is no fixing this quietly. Graham said. He looked back at me. His expression was pleading. He was searching for a lifeline, for some sign that I would be merciful, that I would separate the personal insult from the professional obligation. I looked back at him. I did not offer mercy. I offered facts. Your fiancé threatened to create a false medical record to discredit me. I said calmly, my parents just corroborated that threat. As an auditor, I am required to report any attempt to manipulate or intimidate compliance staff. It goes into the file. Graham, everything goes into the file. Graham closed his eyes. He looked like he wanted to vomit. Marin let out a sound of pure frustration, a guttural scream that made everyone jump. Why are you listening to her? She shrieked. She is nothing. She is the missing piece. She doesn't belong here. My father finally spoke. He stepped forward, his face gray. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in 9 years. He looked for the scared teenager he had kicked out. He did not find her. He found a woman wearing a blazer that cost more than his golf club membership, standing next to a partner who wielded as much power as he did. He saw the way Mr. Vance had stepped away. He saw the way Graham was looking at Marin with horror. He realized, with a clarity that must have tasted like ash, that his game was over. Harper, he said. His voice was rough. I did not answer him. I did not owe him an answer. I turned to Sloane. Archived. I said, it was our code word. It meant we are done. We are leaving. Sloane nodded. She took my arm, not to support me, but to stand with me. We turned to leave. We did not run. We walked slowly, deliberately, down the marble hallway. Wait, Graham called out. Harper, please, I did not stop. You can't just walk away. Marin screamed after me. You ruined everything. I kept walking. I heard the murmurs of the crowd rising to a crescendo behind me. I heard my mother trying to hush Marin. I heard Graham's voice, low and furious, saying something to my father. I walked out the front doors of the estate and into the warm, humid night air of Charleston. The valet was waiting. I did not look back at the house. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening inside. The perfect picture had not just cracked, it had been smashed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding the broom. The valet was taking a long time. It was a mundane delay, a simple matter of logistics in a crowded driveway, but it acted as an anchor, holding me in the doorway of the estate just long enough for the storm to break. I stood on the threshold, the humid Charleston air pressing against my back while the air-conditioned chill of the manor house cooled my face. I should have kept walking. I should have marched down the driveway and hailed a cab. But the sound of Graham Sutter's voice, rising in pitch and urgency, tethered me to the spot. It was the sound of a man realizing he had purchased a house on a sinkhole. I turned back. I did not step fully into the hall, but I leaned against the heavy oak doorframe, watching the scene unravel from the periphery. Sloane stood beside me, silent and watchful. Her arms crossed over her chest. We were no longer participants. We were the jury. Graham had not followed me outside. He had stopped a few feet from the door, turning back to face Maren and my parents, the guests, who had previously been pretending to mingle, had now abandoned all pretense of politeness. They formed a tight, suffocating circle around the bride and groom, their faces hungry for the disaster. Graham was not yelling. He was doing something far worse. He was auditing. He looked at Maren, who was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, her chest heaving in a rhythm that was slightly too fast to be natural. "Where did you do your residency?" Maren Graham asked. The question was simple. It was the kind of question you ask a doctor at a cocktail party to make polite conversation, but Graham asked it with the flat, dangerous intonation of a prosecutor. Maren blinked, caught off guard by the specificity. She had expected him to comfort her, to chase after the evil sister, to validate her victimhood. She was not prepared for a background check. "I told you," she stammered, her voice high and thin. "I did it at Hopkins. You know that." "Which program?" Graham asked immediately. Maren hesitated. It was a fraction of a second, a tiny hitch in her processing speed. But to anyone who knew what to look for, it was a siren. "The pediatric program," she said. "Which one?" Graham pressed, stepping closer. "The general pediatrics track or the specialized neurology track?" "Who was your program director?" Maren took a step back, her heels scraping loudly against the marble. She looked at our mother, a desperate, frantic glance that begged for a lifeline. My mother opened her mouth to speak, to throw up a wall of chaff, but Graham held up a hand to silence her without even looking her way. "Answer me." "Maren," Graham said, "you have been talking about your patients for 6 months. You talk about the stress. You talk about the hours. So tell me the name of the person who signed off on your hours." Maren's face went from flushed to a sickly, pale white. She licked her lips. "Dr. Reynolds," she said. "It was Dr. Reynolds." Graham stared at her. The silence that stretched out between them was heavy enough to crush a lung. "There is no doctor. Reynolds in the neurology department at Hopkins," Graham said quietly. "I know that because my father sits on the board of oversight for their donor relations. We just approved a grant for their new wing last week. I saw the entire staff directory. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish." Maren let out a nervous, jagged laugh. "Well, he is new, or maybe he left. I do not keep track of every administrative change. Graham, I have been busy planning a wedding." "You are lying," Graham said. He did not say it with anger. He said it with a terrifying sense of wonder. "You are lying about all of it." My father stepped in then. He moved with the heavy, blustering energy of a man trying to put out a grease fire with a blanket. He placed a hand on Graham's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be paternal, but looked coercive. "Graham, this is not the time," my father said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Maren is upset. Her sister just caused a scene. You are exhausted. We are all exhausted. We can discuss the particulars of Maren's career later. In private, Right now, we have guests waiting. This is not the time. It is the universal anthem of the liar. It is the phrase people use when time is their enemy, when the truth is catching up to them, and they need just one more hour, one more day, one more cycle to hide the body. Graham shrugged my father's hand off his shoulder. He looked at my father with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "This is exactly the time," Graham said, "because I am realizing that I do not know who I am marrying." He turned back to Marin. "You said you were on call last Tuesday." Graham said, "You said you had an emergency surgery assist. I called the hospital switchboard to leave a message for you because your phone was off. They told me there was no doctor. Parker in the system." Marin's eyes widened. "You? You checked on me." "I was worried," Graham shouted, his composure finally cracking. "I thought something had happened to you, and when I told your mother, she said it was a clerical error. She said you were listed under a maiden name or a temporary ID. I believed her. God help me. I believed her because who lies about being a doctor?" He looked around the room, his eyes wild. "Who does that? Who fakes a medical degree?" Guests were beginning to reach into their pockets and purses. It started with one person, a young woman in a red dress near the back, holding her phone up discreetly, then another, then three more. The cameras were rolling. This was not cruelty. This was instinct. In luxury spaces, when the facade cracks, people record it. They record it because chaos is currency, and because if things go to court, the person with the video is the person who controls the narrative. Marin saw the phones. She saw the red recording lights. "Stop it," she screamed, spinning around. "Stop filming me. I do not owe anyone a performance." She was performing panic in real time, but it was not the panic of an innocent person wrongly accused. It was the panic of an actress who has forgotten her lines in the middle of the third act. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Marin yelled at Graham. "You are supposed to be on my side." "I am supposed to be marrying a partner, not a con artist," Graham shot back. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his own phone. "I am pulling up the state medical license verification board," Graham said, his thumb hovering over the screen. "It is a public database. Marin, if you are a resident, if you have a doctorate, your name is there. It takes 10 seconds. My mother lunged forward. "Graham, don't be ridiculous." Graham ignored her. He tapped the screen. "I am typing in Parker. Marin Elizabeth Parker." Marin froze. She looked at the phone in his hand like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. She knew what he would find. She knew that the screen would return a blank result, a no records found message that would be the tombstone of her entire life. She could not let the truth enter the room. In a movement that was shocking in its violence, Marin lunged at him. She did not try to talk him down. She did not try to run. She grabbed his wrist with both hands and clawed at the device. "Give it to me," she shrieked. Graham, stunned, tried to pull back, but Marin was fueled by the hysterical strength of absolute desperation. She wrenched the phone from his grip. She did not put it in her pocket. She did not try to delete the search. She threw it. She wound up and hurled the phone as hard as she could against the marble floor. Crack! The sound was explosive. It sounded like a gunshot in the enclosed hallway. The phone skittered across the polished stone, a shattered mess of glass and metal, coming to a rest at the feet of a horrified bridesmaid. The silence that followed was total. It was a profound, ringing silence, the kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the refrigerator in the catering kitchen 3 rooms away. The guests stood frozen. The recording phones were still held high, capturing the aftermath. Marin stood panting, her chest heaving, her hands curled into fists at her sides. She stared at the broken phone, and for a second, she looked relieved. She had destroyed the evidence. She had stopped the search. But she had destroyed something else, too. She had destroyed the doubt. Graham looked at the smashed phone. Then he looked at Marin. His face was completely drained of emotion. It was the blank, shock-induced calm of a man who has just watched his house burn down and has nothing left to save. My mother, sensing the total collapse of the situation, immediately went into damage control mode. She rushed to Marin, wrapping her arms around her, shielding her from the cameras. She is overwhelmed, my mother cried out, her voice pitching up into a theatrical wail. Can't you see? She is having a breakdown, the stress of the wedding, the pressure. It is too much. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto me where I stood by the door. She pointed a trembling finger in my direction. It is her fault, my mother shouted. Harper did this. She came here to trigger her. She knows Maren is sensitive. She pushed her until she snapped. This is all because of that jealous, vindictive. She stopped. She stopped because I had stepped forward. I walked out of the shadows of the doorway and back into the light of the chandelier. I did not yell. I did not look angry. I looked at the shattered phone on the floor, and then I looked at my mother. I felt a strange sense of peace. For years, they had told me I was the crazy one. For years, they had told me I was the one who broke things, the one who couldn't handle reality. But here we were. The evidence was on the floor. I spoke clearly, my voice slicing through her accusations like a scalpel through dead tissue. If she did not lie, I said, looking directly at my mother, she would not need to break the proof. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. There was no rebuttal. There was no spin that could fix the image of a bride smashing a phone to prevent a simple name search. I looked at Graham. He was staring at me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, a surrender. I turned back to Sloane. Let's go, I said. This time, nobody tried to stop us. The valet had finally pulled the car around. We walked out the door, leaving the shattered glass and the shattered family behind us. The murmur of the crowd rising like a swarm of bees as the reality of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. The valet slammed the car door shut, and the sound was like a period at the end of a terrifying sentence. Sloane did not wait for me to buckle my seatbelt. She shifted the car into drive and peeled out of the estate's crushed gravel driveway. Leaving the dust and the shouting far behind us, we did not speak for the first 5 miles. The only sound in the car was the hum of the engine and the air conditioning blasting against my heated skin. Then, my phone began to light up. It started with a single vibration against my thigh, then another, then a continuous, angry buzzing that rattled against the center console where I had tossed it. I looked down at the screen. It was a cascade of notifications, a digital avalanche triggered by the landslide I had just caused. No number. How could you do this to your mother? She is hyperventilating. Aunt Linda, who had not called me in 8 years, you need to come back and apologize immediately. This is unforgivable behavior. Harper, Dad. Pick up the phone. Now. I watched the messages roll in, one after another, filling the lock screen with guilt, commands, and sudden, manufactured emergencies. My father sent 3 texts in rapid succession, claiming my mother was having chest pains. It was their classic playbook. When they lost control of the narrative, they weaponized their health. They turned themselves into fragile victims and the person holding the mirror into the aggressor. I silenced the phone and flipped it face down. Do not answer it, Sloane said, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. We are not negotiating with terrorists. I am not, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking slightly. It is the adrenaline. It takes 20 minutes to metabolize. Sloane's phone, mounted on the dashboard, lit up with a single, blue message. It was from Graham. He had not texted me. He was smart enough, or perhaps scared enough, to know that direct contact with me might be volatile. He texted the consultant. He texted the professional. Sloane tapped the screen to have the car read the message aloud. The robotic voice filled the cabin, stripping Graham's words of emotion, but making them sound even more ominous. Graham Sutter. My father has called an emergency board meeting. We are reviewing everything: credentials, timelines, background checks on the Parker family. The reception is effectively over. Please tell Harper that I am sorry. Sloane glanced at me. He is scrubbing the deck, she said. The Sutters are in damage control mode. They are going to audit Maren's entire existence before sunrise. I stared out the window at the passing marshland, dark and impenetrable in the night. It had begun. The unraveling. I had pulled a single thread, the lie about the residency, and now the entire tapestry was coming apart. But I knew my parents. I knew they would not go down quietly. They would not admit defeat. They would counterattack. 10 minutes later, a message came through on my encrypted work app. It was from David, a junior analyst on my team back in Atlanta. It was flagged as urgent. David Harper. I am seeing some weird chatter on the donor compliance logs. We just got a flag regarding the Parker Charitable Trust interactions. It seems the Sutter family legal team just requested a freeze on all pending transfers. Also, I am hearing rumors that the Parker family is telling people you had a psychotic break at a wedding. Do we need to issue a statement? I closed my eyes. A psychotic break. That was their angle. They were launching a smear campaign. They were already messaging the guests, the board members, the entire social circle, telling them that I was vindictive, mentally unstable, and off my medication. They were trying to discredit the witness before I could testify. If they could convince enough people that I was crazy, then my accusations about Marin's fake degree would just look like the jealous ravings of a black sheep. They do not win with truth. I whispered to myself. They win with repetition. If they said it enough times, to enough people, it became the truth. That was how they had survived for so long. That was how they had convinced the world they were perfect parents while I was scrubbing floors at a diner. I need to send something, I said to Sloan. She frowned. You said no negotiating. I am not negotiating. I said, I am engaging in reputation management. If I let them paint me as unstable, it compromises my license. I cannot have an entire hospital board thinking their lead auditor's hallucinating. I opened my phone. I did not text my parents. I did not text Marin. I found the contact for Graham Sutter. I had his number from the audit files. Though I had never used it for personal reasons, I attached a single audio file. It was not a new recording. It was an old one. It was a voicemail from 7 years ago, saved in my evidence folder. It was from the year I was 20, when I had asked my parents for a cosigner on a car loan so I could get to work. I pressed send. In the recording, my mother's voice was crystal clear, dripping with condescension. Harper, we are not going to support your lifestyle. If you cannot afford a car, you should not have moved out. We are saving our credit for Marin's future. She is going to need significant support for her medical training, and we are not going to waste our liquidity on your failures. I added a simple caption. This is the support they claim they gave me. This is the medical training she never started. Feel free to verify the timestamp. It was a surgical strike. It proved two things: my parents were liars about their support, and the narrative of Marin's medical training had been a premeditated financial drain for years. I put the phone down. I did not wait for a reply. We were crossing the bridge back into the city limits when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. I looked at the screen. The name displayed was Mason Pike. My stomach dropped. Mason never called. He was the family acquaintance who had helped me fix my car 9 years ago, the one who had told me I wasn't crazy. He was a quiet man, an insurance broker who kept his head down. If he was calling me at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, something was wrong. I answered. Mason Harper. His voice was low, urgent. He sounded like he was standing in a closet. Are you safe? I am with Sloan, I said. We are leaving Charleston. Good, he said. Keep driving. Listen to me closely. I was at the rehearsal dinner. I heard what happened. I heard your father talking to his lawyer in the cloakroom about 20 minutes ago. Talking about what I asked. He is trying to figure out if he can get you arrested for harassment, Mason said, but that is not why I'm calling. Harper, when you mentioned the fraud, when you mentioned the residency, it made me check something. Check what I handle your father's umbrella insurance policy, Mason said, and I handle a rider for Marin. When I was updating their file last year, I saw a liability crossover linked to an education loan. I frowned. A loan? My parents have money. Why would they need a loan? That is what I thought, Mason said, but I looked at the guarantor data. It was a private student loan, $50,000, taken out in the year 2018. 2018. That was 4 years after I left. Okay, I said, confused. So they took out a loan for Marin. Why does that matter? Because Marin is not the borrower. Harper, Mason said. His voice dropped to a whisper. The primary borrower listed on the internal document is you. The car seemed to swerve. Though Sloan was driving perfectly straight, the world tilted on its axis. Me, I choked out. That is impossible. I never took out a loan. I paid for my degree in cash and scholarships. I have zero debt. I know, Mason said. But the social security number on the file matches yours. The signature looks like yours. But the disbursement went to an account controlled by your father. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the icy, paralyzing realization of betrayal so deep it felt like violence. They used my identity. They had not just refused to pay for my college. They had stolen my name, my credit history, and my legal identity to take out a loan for $50,000, and they had pocketed the money. They had loaded me with debt I didn't know existed, likely to fund the facade of Marin's life, or perhaps just to maintain their own lifestyle while liquidity was tight. Check your credit, Mason commanded. Do it now. Look for closed accounts. Look for anything serviced by a private lender. They probably paid the interest to keep it quiet. Or maybe they paid it off with other funds to hide the trail, but the record will be there. I will, I said. My voice sounded robotic. Thank you. Mason, I hung up. Sloan, I said, pull over. She looked at me, saw the look on my face, and immediately swerved into the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy. She put the car in park and turned on the dome light. What is it? She asked. I opened my laptop bag. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unzip the case. I pulled out my computer and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. Mason says they took out a loan in my name. I said. Sloan's eyes went wide. That is a felony. I logged into the credit monitoring service I used for my annual background checks. Usually. I just glanced at the score 780, pristine. I never dug into the archived reports. I assumed that because the score was high. The history was clean. I navigated to the closed accounts section. I filtered by date. There it was. Lender Apex, Private Education Trust. Loan type undergraduate private. Amount $50,000. Opened August 2018. Status closed/paid in full. Cosigner, Graham Parker, father. Primary borrower, Harper James. I stared at the screen. The pixels seemed to burn into my retinas. They had done it. They had actually done it. In the year 2018, while I was working double shifts and eating instant noodles to save money for my own certifications. My parents had forged my signature on a loan application. But why, Sloan asked, leaning over to look at the screen. Why take it out and then pay it off? I clicked on the disbursement details. It was a messy trail. But I knew how to read messy trails. Look at the date it was paid off, I said, pointing to the screen. January 2020. That was 2 years later. Where did they get $50,000 in a lump sum in January 2020, I asked. Sloan thought for a moment. That was when the first tranche of the Sutter Health grant came through for the hospital expansion. The project your father's construction firm was consulting on. The pieces slammed together. They took out the loan in my name to bridge a gap in their finances, probably to pay for Marin's tuition, or her apartment, or her wardrobe to keep up appearances. Then, when the grant money from the Sutters came in charitable money meant for a hospital wing, they siphoned off a chunk of it to pay off the loan. They used my identity to commit fraud, and then they used stolen charity money to cover up the identity theft. It was a circle of crime, a perfect closed loop, and I was the fulcrum. This was no longer a story about a family that didn't love me. This was no longer a drama about a wedding or a fake medical degree. This was federal wire fraud. This was identity theft. This was embezzlement. I sat back in the car seat, the laptop warm on my knees. I looked at the timestamps. Every single transaction was stamped, dated, and logged. They had left a digital footprint that they thought was buried. They thought that because they paid it off, the crime had disappeared. But in my world, in the world of compliance and forensics, nothing ever disappears. I looked at Sloane. My fear was gone. The shaking in my hands had stopped. It was replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a prosecutor who has just found the murder weapon. "Drive," I said. "Where are we going?" "We are going home." I said, "I need my main server, and I need to call the FBI." The story wasn't emotional anymore. It was financial. It was criminal. And I had the receipts. Monday morning at Luminarch Integrity Solutions did not begin with a family reunion. It began with the quiet, rhythmic hum of high-efficiency servers and the smell of industrial-strength coffee. I was sitting at my desk on the 42nd floor, staring at a dual-monitor setup that displayed a complex web of wire transfers for a logistics client. When the red light on my desk phone blinked, it was the reception desk in the main lobby. "Ms. James." The receptionist's voice was tight, clipped with the specific kind of polite stress that indicates a problem she is not paid enough to handle. "I have two individuals here demanding to see you, a Mr. and Mrs. Parker. They say they are your parents." I stopped typing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 in the morning. They had driven back from Charleston, likely in the middle of the night, fueled by panic and the desperate need to control a narrative that had already spun out of their orbit. "Tell them I am in a meeting," I said calmly. "I tried that," the receptionist said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They are getting loud. Ms. James, the gentleman is threatening to walk past the turnstiles. He is saying that he has a right to see his daughter and that we are holding you against your will. Security is stepping in now." I closed my eyes for a brief second, inhaling the sterile, conditioned air of the office. This was my sanctuary. This was the place where rules mattered, where logic reigned supreme, and where emotional outbursts were met with performance improvement plans. Not capitulation. They were trying to bring their chaos into my cathedral. "I will come down," I said. "But call Marcus in HR. Tell him I need a witness." I did not run to the elevator. I walked. I straightened my blazer. I checked my reflection in the glass wall of the conference room. I did not look like the terrified teenager who had fled a house in the middle of the night. I looked like a senior compliance officer who was about to deal with a hostile vendor. When the elevator doors opened on the lobby level, the scene was almost comical in its predictability. My father was standing near the security desk, his face a mottled shade of crimson, pointing a finger at a security guard who was a foot taller and considerably wider than him. My mother was standing slightly behind him, weeping into a handkerchief, performing the role of the distraught mother for the benefit of the delivery couriers and visiting clients. They looked out of place here. In the context of a country club or a wedding venue, their arrogance looked like status. Here, in a lobby of glass and steel, where everyone was wearing badges and moving with purpose, they just looked like a disturbance. I walked toward them, stopping 10 feet away. I did not cross the security barrier. "That is enough," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried. My father spun around. When he saw me, his expression shifted from anger to a look of profound, aggressive relief. "Harper," he barked, "tell this incompetence to let us through. We need to talk to you. Now. You can talk to me here," I said, "or you can leave. Those are the options. We are not discussing family matters in a lobby," he shouted. People turned to stare. I looked at the security guard. "Mike, is there a conference room available on the ground floor? The one with the glass walls?" Mike nodded. "Room 1B is open. Ms. James, do you want me to stand outside?" "Please," I said. I swiped my badge and opened the heavy glass door to the conference room. It was a fishbowl, completely transparent, visible to the entire lobby. I did this on purpose. I wanted them to know that there were no shadows here. There were no dark corners where they could twist the truth. Everything was visible. My parents marched in. I followed. And Marcus, the HR director, slipped in behind me. Marcus was a man of few words and absolute discretion. He carried a notepad and a pen. "Who is this?" my father demanded, glaring at Marcus. "This is Marcus," I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "He is here as a witness. This is a place of business. If you are going to be here, we are going to follow professional protocol." My mother let out a sob, collapsing into one of the ergonomic chairs. "Oh, Harper, please. Why do you have to be so cold? Your sister is devastated. She hasn't stopped crying for 24 hours. I folded my hands on the table. I did not offer them water. I did not ask how the drive was. "State your business," I said. My father placed both hands on the table, leaning forward in a posture that was meant to be intimidating. "You need to fix this," he said. His voice was a low growl. "You caused a scene that has humiliated this family. The Sutters are asking questions. The board is asking questions. Marin's reputation is in tatters. And I asked, and you are going to issue a statement." He said, "You are going to write a letter to Graham and his father. You are going to say that you were mistaken. You are going to say that you have been under a lot of stress and that you confused Marin's residency with someone else's. You are going to say that you were off your medication." I looked at him. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to gaslight myself. They wanted me to destroy my own professional credibility to patch up the hole in their sinking ship. And if I don't, I asked. My father's eyes narrowed. "If you don't, we will ruin you. Harper, we know people in this industry. We will tell everyone that you are mentally unstable. We will sue you for defamation. We will make sure you never work in compliance again. You think you are powerful because you have a fancy title. You are nothing without a reputation." My mother looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "We just want peace. Harper, we are a family. Families protect each other. Marin is being targeted because of your jealousy. How can you be so cruel? She is your little sister." Nostalgia, intimidation, guilt, the unholy trinity of their parenting style. I reached down into my bag. I did not pull out a tissue. I pulled out a black folder. I had prepared it at 5 a.m, printing out the documents on the high-resolution office printer. It contained 3 things. I slid the folder across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of my father. "Open it," I said. My father looked at the folder. He hesitated. He was a businessman. He knew what a dossier looked like. He knew that when someone slides a folder across a table in a room with a witness, the conversation is about to change. He opened it. The first page was a transcript of the voicemail I had sent them the night before. The one where they refused to pay for my community college while promising to save their credit for Marin. The second page was a collection of their emails where they discussed managing my exit from the family. But it was the third page that made the blood drain from his face. It was the loan document. I watched his eyes scan the page. I watched him see the logo of Apex Private Education Trust. I watched him see the amount $50,000. I watched him see the date August 2018. And I watched him see the signature at the bottom, Harper James, a signature that he had forged. His hand twitched. He looked up at me, and the arrogance was gone. It was replaced by the sudden, sharp fear of a man who realizes he has walked into a trap. You recognize that, don't you? I asked softly. My mother leaned over to look. When she saw the document, she gasped. She put a hand to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and my father. That is old, she stammered. That is paid off. We paid that off years ago. Yes, I said. You paid it off in January of 2020. Interestingly, that is the exact same week the first construction draw from the Sutter Health Grant was deposited into Dad's consulting account. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. My father closed the folder. He did it slowly, carefully, as if the paper inside were radioactive. You can't prove anything, he said. His voice was hoarse. I don't have to prove it to you. I said, I have to prove it to the forensic auditors. I leaned back in my chair. Here is how this works, I said, using the same tone I used when explaining a failing grade to a CEO. You threatened to sue me for defamation. You threatened to ruin my reputation. I invite you to do so. Please, file a lawsuit. Because the moment you file a lawsuit, we enter the discovery phase. I pointed to the folder. In discovery, I will subpoena every single financial record you have. I will subpoena the bank records from 2018. I will hire handwriting experts to analyze that signature. I will subpoena the construction draw records from the Sutter Project to trace the flow of funds. I will turn this entire conference room into a crime scene investigation of your finances for the last decade. I looked at Marcus, who was scribbling furiously in his notebook. And, I continued, I have already prepared signed affidavits regarding the identity theft. I have spoken to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division this morning. I haven't filed the official report yet. I wanted to give you a chance to see the evidence first. My father looked like he was having a stroke. His face was gray. He opened his mouth to speak, to threaten, to bluster. But nothing came out. He knew. He knew that I wasn't bluffing. He knew that I did this for a living. My mother started to cry harder. But this time, it wasn't a performance. It was the terrified weeping of a woman watching her life disintegrate. Harper, please, she sobbed. You don't understand. We had to do it. The money. Things were tight. The business was struggling. And Maren. She needed so much. The tutors. The apartment. The clothes. She had to look the part. If she didn't look the part, she wouldn't meet someone like Graham. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. We only did what we had to do to keep Maren on track. She whispered. There it was, the confession. They had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, and risked federal prison. Not because they were starving, but because they needed to maintain the image of success for their golden child. They had cannibalized my future to pay for Maren's costume. I looked at them. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt only a profound, icy detachment. You don't get to sabotage my future and then demand my silence. I said. I stood up. The meeting is over. I said, Marcus will escort you out. Harper, my father yelled, standing up. You cannot do this. We are your parents. I walked to the door. I held it open. The security guard, Mike, was standing right there, his arms crossed. I am not your daughter today. I said, today, I am the victim of identity theft, and you are the perpetrators. I walked out of the conference room. I did not look back. I heard my mother wailing. I heard my father shouting something about ungrateful children, but I kept walking. I walked past the reception desk, past the security turnstiles, and toward the elevators. I had given them a choice. I had given them a chance to walk away. But they had chosen to come into my house and threaten me. And now, they were going to learn that in my house, the ledger always balances. The forensic audit of my parents' life did not take weeks. It took 48 hours. When you know where the bodies are buried, you do not need to dig up the whole cemetery. You just need to bring a shovel to the right plot. After the confrontation in the conference room, I went back to my desk and I kept digging. The $50,000 loan they had taken out in my name was just the thread that unraveled the sweater. I needed to understand the pattern. I needed to understand why a couple who lived in a historic estate and drove European cars needed to steal their teenage daughter's identity for a sum that, to them, should have been pocket change. The answer lay in the timeline. I cross-referenced Maren's academic history with the loan disbursement dates. The story my parents told the world was that Maren was in a prestigious pre-med program. The story the bank statements told was very different. Maren had not been in school. She had been in a tailspin. She had failed out of her undergraduate program after 3 semesters. There was no medical school acceptance. There was no residency. But my parents could not accept a reality where their golden child was average. So, they bought a different reality. They used the money they stole from my credit rating to fund a fake life. They paid for an apartment in the city where the medical school was located, so Maren could live near campus. They paid for tutors, who were actually life coaches trying to manage her anxiety. They paid for the appearance of a medical education without the actual education. They were buying time, hoping that if they threw enough money at the problem, Maren would eventually get back on track, but she never did. And when the money ran out, they had to find a new source. That was where the Sutters came in. The final piece of the puzzle came from Mason Pike on Sunday afternoon. He called me while I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by printed bank statements. "Harper," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. "I found the deed. I went into the archives for the old policies. Your grandmother left a trust." I frowned. I knew my grandmother had money, but I thought it had all gone to my father. She left a specific education trust. Mason explained. It was established in 1998. It was designated strictly for the educational expenses of her grandchildren. The principal was $250,000. Invested conservatively, it should be worth over $500,000 by now. I felt a chill. I never saw a dime of that. "Exactly," Mason said. "But here's the kicker. Clause 4B. I am reading it right now. It says that the parents are named as primary trustees, but they are fiduciary agents. That means they have a legal obligation to use the funds only for accredited educational institutions. If the funds are used for any other purpose, personal debts, lifestyle maintenance, or non-educational expenses, the trusteeship is immediately revoked." "And who becomes the trustee?" I asked, holding my breath. Mason paused. "The successor trustee is named as the eldest grandchild. That is you, Harper." I closed my eyes. My parents had not just ignored the trust, they had raided it. I could see the withdrawals in the forensic trace I had run on my father's accounts. They had drained the trust to pay for the country club, for the renovations, and to pay off the interest on the fraudulent loan they took out in my name. They had stolen my grandmother's legacy to maintain the lie that I was worthless and Marin was perfect, by stealing from the trust to fund a fake medical degree. They had violated the core term of the deed. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up a pen. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I did not go to my office. I walked into the federal courthouse with a stack of documents 3 inches thick. I filed a petition for an emergency injunction and a motion to enforce the successor trustee clause. I attached the affidavit from Mason Pike. I attached the proof of the fraudulent loan. I attached the bank records showing the misuse of funds. It was clean. It was procedural. It was unstoppable. By noon, the automatic review clause triggered an asset freeze. This is the thing about financial law. It does not care about your social standing. It does not care if you are a pillar of the community. If a credible claim of fiduciary breach is filed with evidence of embezzlement, the accounts are locked. All of them. The personal checking accounts, the business operating accounts, the investment portfolios, everything. My parents went to pay for lunch at a bistro in Charleston, and their cards were declined. The collapse happened fast. It was like watching a controlled demolition. Graham Sutter's family did not wait for the court date. The moment the news of the filing hit the legal wires, and it always does in these circles, they moved to protect themselves. They were a family that owned hospitals. They could not be associated with fraud. They canceled the wedding on Tuesday. It was not a postponement. It was a cancellation. Graham issued a brief, sterile statement through his family's attorney, saying that in light of new information regarding the credentials of the bride, the union would not be moving forward. It was a polite way of saying, "We do not marry con artists." Marin's life evaporated. Without the wedding, without the fake title, without the money to prop her up. She was just a 25-year-old woman with no degree, no job, and a public record of deception. The hospital where she claimed to work issued a cease and desist letter forbidding her from using their name. Her job offer vanished because it never existed in the first place. But the hardest blow fell on my parents, the donor network. The group of wealthy friends they had cultivated for decades stopped answering their calls. In Charleston, reputation is currency. When the rumor spread that the Parkers had stolen their daughter's identity and embezzled their late mother's trust fund, they became radioactive. The creditors, smelling blood in the water, started calling. The construction loans my father had floated based on his good name were called in. They were not just broke, they were exposed. On Wednesday night, my phone rang. It was my father. I looked at the screen. I was sitting on my balcony with Sloan. We were drinking tea. The city lights of Atlanta were twinkling below us, a vast ocean of truth and commerce. "Answer it," Sloan said softly. "Finish it." I swiped the green button. "Harper." His voice was a wreck. It sounded old, cracked, and terrified. But even in the ruins, he tried to find a weapon. "Are you happy?" he asked. His voice trembled with a mixture of rage and self-pity. "You destroyed us. You destroyed your sister. The house is going into foreclosure. Harper, the accounts are frozen. We have nothing. Everyone is laughing at us. Are you happy now?" I took a sip of my tea. The liquid was warm and soothing. "I am not happy." "Dad," I said, "I am just accurate. You are cruel." He spat. "You are a heartless, ungrateful child. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us, by dragging our name through the mud, by bankrupting us over some technicality. You are cold. Harper, you have ice in your veins." I listened to him. I listened to the man who had looked at me when I was 17 and told me I was an attitude problem. I listened to the man who had laughed when my mother said I would crawl back. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to apologize. He wanted me to be the daughter who begged for his approval. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. I was the successor trustee. "You are right about one thing," I said. He stopped, breathing heavy. "What you told me to be independent," I said. My voice was steady, calm, and final. "You told me to learn the value of $1. You told me that actions have consequences, and that no one would save me." I paused. I let the silence stretch out across the phone line, across the miles, across the years of hurt. "You taught me independence. Dad, this is what it looks like." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't wait for the explosion or the begging or the tears. I ended the call. I put the phone down on the table. I turned it over, screen side down. Sloane reached out and took my hand. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed my fingers. A solid, grounding pressure. I looked out at the skyline. I took a deep breath. My chest, which had felt tight for 9 years, finally unclenched. The knot of anxiety, the constant, low-level hum of needing to prove I existed, was gone. I thought about the missing piece for so long. I had believed their insult. I believed I was the piece that didn't fit, the piece that was lost, the piece that ruined the picture. But I realized now that they were wrong. I wasn't the missing piece. I was the piece they had to remove. Because if I had stayed, if I had remained in their picture, everyone would have seen the rot underneath. I was the evidence they tried to shred, but evidence has a way of surviving. I squeezed Sloane's hand back. I was done being edited out. I was done being the ghost. "I am ready for dinner," I said. We went inside, leaving the phone and the past in the dark where they belonged. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how this ended. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear that the truth always wins.